Joining us live now is the Deputy Nationals leader, David Littleproud. David, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. We will start off with that developing news overnight. China and the Solomon Islands pushing ahead with a security pact. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is deeply concerning, these developments, but what we can take some solace out of is that the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands has made it clear that there will be no military bases on the Solomon Island and that Australia will be its preference in terms of supporting them for security matters. We will be their priority in terms of who they turn to. But this is a development that gives us and the rest of the Pacific family great concern, and even our allies in the United States. And it's one that we'll work through as a Pacific family with the United States to make sure that we protect our interests across the Pacific and that we understand the real and live threat that this poses, not just to Australia, but to the rest of the Pacific family as well.
But do you really believe Sogavare when he says he's not going to build a military base for China? Because isn't he in the CCP's pocket, so now he just has to do what he's told?
Well, we've got to appreciate the Solomon Islands is a sovereign nation that gets to determine its own future, but it's part of a Pacific family that we broadly have worked together to make sure that we understand the influence in which China is trying to impose and the threat that that poses not only to Australia and New Zealand but to other Pacific nations, and to make sure that we all have a role to play in that, and so too does the United States, and their concern on this is evident, that we need to make sure that we collectively work together. Now, I'm not going to pass gratuitous advice or judgment from this far away on the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands. I don't think that's constructive. I think what is constructive is continue to have dialogue with the Prime Minister and their government to understand that any military base on the Solomon Islands would pose a real clear threat to the Pacific family and to Australia.
Well, you're a Queenslander. Potentially you're looking at a military base about 1,700 kilometres off the coast of Townsville.
Well, this is exactly what Australians need to understand. The world is changing. You only have to look at what's happened in the Ukraine. You need strong leadership. You need the ability to draw a line in the sand and to work with your coalition partners to make sure that that line in the sand is made real, and that there's understanding that if you cross that line, then there are consequences. And that's why we've been working with the AUKUS arrangement. The AUKUS arrangement wasn't just about subs. This was for, in fact, these types of events. We were thinking far in advance. The Prime Minister was able to get an agreement that for generations Australians will look back on and go, has kept us safe. There's a new world order trying to appear here, and how we draw that line now will determine the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy now and how much of those we can enjoy in the future because of the actions we take now. And that's the important thing to appreciate. You need strong leadership to be able to work through this complex issues, continue to use diplomacy, but make sure there's a real understanding that if a line is crossed, then so too will be the actions back from our side.
OK, and we've got Zed Seselja coming up in the program next hour for a few more questions on that. Now, a few other local matters. Minister, both major parties have said that they won't be doing deals with the independents, including the Climate 200 group, but in the event of a hung parliament, you might have to, right?
Well, we've taken a clear leadership plan to the Australian people. It was called a budget. We've been able to articulate that. We've been able to articulate that quite clearly about how we pay for everything that we put forward. We've also made very clear our policies on climate. We've taken a very practical and sensible approach. We're living up to international commitments, and I think this self-loathing that goes on in this country to say that we haven't done our heavy lifting. We've reduced emissions by 20%. We're also we've lived up to Kyoto. We've lived up to Paris. Well, I think this is where the Australian people get to decide, and they have a real opportunity here to make sure that they want clear leadership, they want strong leadership, not only on an economic front, but on a national security front. When you've got a Labor leader that can't even tell you about his policies for border protection, is all over the shop, you want clear, concise leadership that'll move strategic pieces that will keep us safe, not just now, but into the future, like AUKUS, like the Quad, like these arrangements they're putting in place. And these independents, while they have an ideology, there's a practical reality to the application of that in the economy and society. And while people in metropolitan areas may appreciate and think that this is great ideology, in practical application, it's not as easy to implement as what you may think, and it'll cost you, and it'll particularly cost regional Australians a lot.
OK, you're guaranteeing 40% of a loan of up to $1 million to try and encourage more farmers out in the regions, but critics say that might get you a house, but what good is the house without land to make an income off?
Well, with respect, I'm talking about an agricultural farm that has productive capacity. This is about helping young people and those men and women that are out there leasing country at the moment, trying to put together a deposit, to give them a little bit of a help to finish off that deposit, to work with the banks. This is commercially assessed by the banks. You just don't get the guarantee unless you can prove you can make money off the property. And every property has a productive capacity level.
Right.
And that's the economics of this. This isn't pushing prices up. This is actually it's always defined by the economics of what you can produce off a property and its carrying capacity or its productive capacity in terms of growing crops. So there's plenty of critics that want to knock, but when I went to the debate yesterday, 10 years of Labor opposition, not one promise, not one idea, not one concept for Australian agriculture. And in fact, they couldn't even tell us where they sat on an ag visa, on live exports, but they could tell us that they want to take more water out of the agriculture sector for no reason other than for a political purpose, to try and win some votes in Adelaide. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan is over. It's done. We don't need to take any more water off farmers. It's now down to infrastructure to return that water to the environment, and farmers should be left alone to get on with the job that they do so well. But the Labor Party are bereft of ideas. Of course we are. We've made it clear.
So how are you going to make a water savings?
It's this thing called infrastructure, and the infrastructure returns through savings of efficiency of water, of preserving the water, stopping it from evaporate. That's the smarts that we've invested in.
You might have to
extend the deadline. It's called the sustainable diversion
right?
limits. Well, and if we have to, we should. But we shouldn't go back to buybacks because it destroys people's livelihoods, not just farmers, but it destroys local communities. And in fact, we have this extra 450 gigalitres that the Labor Party put in. It's dead. We have a neutrality test between all the states, and they know they can't change it, but they're politicising this, saying we're going to go back to the 450 and get buybacks. They can't. The states all have to agree, and the states won't agree.
So how much might you have to extend the deadline?
Well, that'll depend on the states. The states are responsible for building these infrastructure projects, and they've made it clear from some time ago that they will need more time to build this infrastructure. We shouldn't be afraid to do that. We've already recovered 2,100 gigalitres or more for the environment. And we can't take any more out of the productive pool for our farmers, and we don't need to. We should back ourselves with infrastructure and the science. And wouldn't that be a stimulus to our regional economies? And that's what the states want to do. Labor want to politicise this. They know that they're just starting a bum fight for the sake of a bum fight, and they're stirring up and really making the uncertainty for farmers up and down the Murray-Darling who have done so much, that have hurt so much, and their communities have hurt so much for a few political votes in Adelaide. That's not what leadership's about. That's what politics is about, and that's what Labor's about.
David Littleproud, we're out of time. Appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you soon.